Alright then, guys, so today, after about a year of owning this machine, give or take a few months, I'm finally getting a start on really making progress on stripping it down a bit to begin a light restoration and rebuild. The machine definitely seems to have had a pretty hard life where it came from. The factory that it has come from I never saw in person, but I was told that they made gears and they were a big engineering firm, and then they have since closed because the owner had passed away and the business was being liquidized. I'm not actually sure what the business was called or where in the UK they were from, but I picked this machine up for £1,500, which, to be fair, for its condition and what I got with it, a little bit steep, but it's a solid machine and I'm quite happy to do the work that's needed to it. As you may have seen in my previous video, about a year ago when I got the machine, I did a light strip down. I cleaned the worst of the machine off with my father. He helped get the grime off the machine when it started, when it arrived. But as you can see, I've showed this in the previous video, I took the headstock cover off. The headstock is extremely filthy. It's got a lot of sludge in there. As you can see, that is some thick sludge. So over a long period of use, you would expect some fine particles from the gears themselves wearing, but that looks excessive. So I do question whether it's been contaminated or whether the lid's been not properly installed at some point in its life and it's got a load of grime inside, or perhaps the wrong oil's been used. But it's extremely dirty throughout the whole gearbox. So I've picked up some flushing oil. Try and get it where you can see it. Some Smith & Allen engine flushing oil. So I've got 20 litres of that. So once I've cleaned the worst of this out, I'm then gonna drain the oil and top it back up with the flushing fluid, then run the machine for a good 20 minutes or so, perhaps even longer, just to get it all flushed around everything after I've cleaned the worst of it out. Then I'll drain the whole system, and I would like to install an inline oil filter into the system so that the future oil is getting filtered and the filter can be changed to hopefully reduce the amount of sludge that's getting pumped back up into this main reservoir area, as this is what feeds the majority of the gearbox into all the different areas. So obviously if this is full of sludge, all that sludge is going to be making its way down the tubes into the headstock bearings, into everywhere where it shouldn't be, So I'm going to do my best to clean out the worst before I pump any more round. I know I have ran the machine since I've bought it, it has been used, but I don't want to run it anymore in this condition. I'd like to get it cleaned as best as I can, and then I can start really inspecting it, because it's hard to tell what everything's doing when it's so covered in grime and dirt. So that's my plan of attack for today. I'm gonna try and get through getting this headstock flushed out, get some fresh oil in there, flush it, get new oil in. I've got some ISO 32 hydraulic oil, which I believe is very similar to what's required for the headstock, although the apron requires a thicker grade oil, like a 68 weight or something, I'm pretty sure. So I've got it jotted down. I need to just double check that before I get some oil for the rest of it, But with what I have, I can get it cleaned out, flushed through, and get it in a much nicer looking condition to be able to really inspect everything over. Right then, let's get at it. So, really making a start on getting this sludge removed out the top of this oil distribution area. Really thick, that, like, it's a lot of grime. Definitely slightly metallic, so you would kind of expect that with heavy use of a gearbox, or if it's not had the correct lubrication for a while. I mean, both the sight glasses look to be cracked. Or definitely, one's definitely got a slight crack in, but it doesn't seem to come out really badly, but it will have lost some oil over time. But just by the state of the machine, I wouldn't have said it's been very well looked after in its previous life. It's it's been a workhorse, to say the least. But as I said earlier, I'm just going to do my best to get as much of this crud out there before I attempt to flush the gearbox through, just to give it a fighting chance, you know. And then when I reinstall everything, I'll be putting an oil filter on to, again, just give it that extra line of protection for all the bearings, because I'm sure if you're watching these videos, you're probably aware of the cost of replacement bearings for a machine like this is well over the price of what you would pay for a second-hand machine, you know. So it's not really viable unless you're going down the industrial restoration route, you know, where you really wanting to make profits on the machine, where this is more just a personal machine for myself, you know. We all try and make a bit back, but it's slow progress for a hobbyist. Obviously, using any rags or paper towel like this, you want to be extremely careful that you don't leave any of it anywhere within the gearbox, because it can clog up the bearings, can block up oil ways. So I'm being extremely careful not to tear it. And this blue roll's of a half decent grade, you know. Some of it's really poor quality, really thin, but this comes from a well-known good quality source. So it seems to work well. There's just so much sludge in here. And this is only what's made it up onto this reservoir. The amount that's going to be in the bottom is going to be quite amazing, I would think. There's going to be some dirty oil coming out of this machine. Now obviously I'll do my best to get around the edges, but there's going to be a lot of it. It's going to be very difficult to get to without actually stripping the gearbox, which at the moment I'm not intending to do. Just so much fine particles everywhere throughout this gearbox. It's really quite amazing how this whole thing works, how it's all designed, how the oil ways are fed just by the pressure of the pump feeding up to this reservoir, and then it distributes throughout the whole gearbox. It's very clever, but if like anything, doesn't matter how well you design something, if it's not maintained, it's not going to perform or last. So let's just hope there's not any serious damage throughout this gearbox once we get into it. That is some thick sludge on here. I would love to know what has caused this, what's been put in. Is it a contaminant? Is it something, a mixture of two different oils? Or is it just plain wear from perhaps low oil levels? Has it been ran dry at some point? Has there been a gap in the lid? Who knows? It's just we need to get it clean. Definitely some burrs on the selector drum here. That's going to need some attention with a little file just to smooth things out. It's obviously had some quick shifts over the years. Interesting, you can even see the induction harden marks around where the detents are for the locating pins. That's cool. Very, very well made, these Colchester Triumphs. Well, all the Colchester lathes seem to have been built to an extremely high standard. Now that's a bit cleaner, nicer. Getting some of the grime off. On the whole, I'm pretty pleased to see that there's no serious damage to any of the gears that I can see yet. I mean, it's obviously dirty in here, but I did give it a good inspect when I got the machine first time round, opened the lid up. No missing teeth. I can't see any chunks of teeth anywhere, which is better, a lot better than I could say for the Colchester Master I picked up a little while ago. If any of you have watched the videos on my channel, the process I went through trying to get that up and running again, it's going to be a similar process with this, but obviously the machine's a bit bigger, and since doing the restoration of my milling machine and my lathe, I've since been trying to learn a bit about scraping, you know, surface scraping. So I've picked myself up a carbide scraper from the Impractical Machinist over on Instagram, and I think he's got a YouTube channel as well. It's pretty good quality. I'm happy with the scraper itself, but I just need to get some more practice in on some test pieces before I move on to scraping the saddle of these machines back into square and true, because all the machines I've got, the ways I've worn, you can feel them. They've been heavily used in one position, and as you get to the ends of the travel, they nip up quite tight. So obviously when I rebuilt the mill I wasn't really confident enough to start attacking the ways, but now I've got a bit more experience and trying to get my head around the theory a bit more. I think I'm confident to start attempting to scrape them. I'm just waiting on cast camelback straight edge coming in from Lamco machinery in the UK here. When it does, I'll be making a start on checking all the surfaces of my machines and working through them, scraping them back in, being parallel and square and flat, how they need to be. So, as you can see, I'm now moving on to the side of the machine, and I've been checking out where I can fill and drain both the gearbox and the headstock oil reservoir. So I've cleaned out the worst of the grime from the headstock. I mean, it's not perfect, but I'm going to be flushing and then cleaning again. So hopefully the flushing oil will pick up a lot of the debris. I have the machine hooked up and ready to use, so I can run it under power for a good amount of time to let the oil get around. But rather than running the dirty oil that's in there, I'm going to try and drain the reservoir, which I've just checked the filler cap, which has a little dipstick on. It's still nigh on full to the dipstick, so it does have the right amount of oil in. But as you can see, this pipe here comes right out to the edge of the machine casting, feeding from the reservoir, so I can drain from the outside edge here, which is pretty handy. I wasn't sure if that whole pipe was going to come off or what, but obviously when the machine's installed you need to be able to drain it from the edge. So I'll try and get the camera positioned here. Get you positioned so you can kind of see what's coming out. I'll try not to get the camera covered in oil. Well, hopefully you guys can see what I'm working on here. Just going to pull out the oil drain plug and drain the old original oil before starting the machine up to flush everything through again. Now once I get this drain plug loose, I'm going to have to use a little pipe there to just act as a bit of a funnel. Turning nicely there. I'm going to try and feel for the end of the plug. There we go. Now I am going to have to stop this oil flow at some point when this container fills up, but I'm just going to do my best to catch as much as I can in the pot. Get a better shot of the actual oil for you. Loosen off the filler cap, see if that helps it drain through a bit. Doesn't seem to affect the flow. Get that filler cap ready. I'm gonna have to try it. Just plug that for a minute while I drain this old oil. So, as expected, it's extremely dirty. A lot of particles in it. Just going to get rid of this and then start again. So, now set up, I'm going to drain the feeds and speeds gearbox of its oil. Get zoomed in a bit better there so you can see what I'm doing. Got the plastic drum there for the waste oil, because I can actually drain straight into the drum for this gearbox because it's high enough. Not like the other one where I've had to drain into multiple trays because of the height of the trays that I've currently got and the size. I've had to do multiple instead of just one tray. So what I'm hoping to do is, if I can just loosen off this drain plug. I think I'll be altering that once I get this drained out for future servicing and draining. I imagine what's been done is someone's put sealant onto this when they've installed it, onto the drain plug, but not onto the elbow. So the elbow now can move. And I'd really like it not to. There we go. That's better. So let's just put that where it's going to be a bit of a nicer angle. And what I'm going to use is just a piece of scaffolding tube, I think, just to act as a bit of a funnel, because the funnels I have aren't really wide enough to take the volume of oil that I'm expecting could flow out of this. So there we go, that's now loose enough to go by my fingers. So I'm going to need to just prop that drum up a little bit just to get the right height. there's nothing even flowing out of it. You'd like to be able to see if there is a little dribble. So I'm going to take out the filler cap, see if it's got a vacuum. So with the filler cap off, I wouldn't say I'm getting any flow at all. Quite a bit of thick sludge on the bottom of the drain cap. Well, I got all prepared for high flow of oil, and it looks like there might not be any oil in this bit, which could be a problem. Let's just so I'll just get this welding rod here, just try and give that a little prod in the elbow there, see if there's a load of sludge built up or if it's just totally empty. Definitely a bit of sludge, but doesn't seem to be relieving anything. Nope. So I'm gonna just put a little bit of flushing oil in whilst I've got the base open, just to see if it's actually holding oil at all, or if it's just going to go straight through. So that's starting to dribble out the bottom there. So it's not clogged completely, but it is very dirty. So I'll get this bottom plug back in and then fill it up with some flushing fluid and run the machine for a little while, because this is looking very dirty in this gearbox, so I'd rather try and flush it a bit before I get any further forward with dismantling. Well, I'm happy with that for now. So with that cap on, just finger tight, having a look at this sight glass. I'll bring you around so you can see what I'm looking at. You can see on this side of the machine, I think I pointed out in my previous video, it looks like there's been a replacement plate added to the side of this gearbox, so that may well be the reason that there's no oil in this gearbox. Because to me, that sight glass looks completely empty. So I'm going to see if I can get you set up and you can watch the sight glass as I fail, and we'll hopefully get it up to the centre of the bubble there, then run the machine and see how much oil we'll use. Clean around the base of this plate to see if there's any fresh oil leaking out after we've filled up. So just going to fill this gearbox up now with some of the Smith & Allen engine fluid flushing oil. So we're creeping up there. There we go. We actually have some oil in there. If anything, I'd say it's slightly above the line, perhaps. No, that's pretty damn close. Let's put a little bit more in since we're flushing it through. Make sure it's going to splash around everything. So I'm happy with that. We've got more than the recommended level in, just to run it for a little while and try and flush the whole thing through. And I still have some flushing fluid left, which I'm pleased about, so I can use that on any more dirty gearboxes, or perhaps in the apron. So that's sitting quite high above the line now, but I think that'll be just fine for flushing through, and then when we come back to refill, get it right to the line. So after running the machine for about 25 minutes here, swapping between forwards and reverse to get the oil splashed up in both directions throughout both gearboxes. I've now got the headstock cover loosened off, and I'm gonna remove the cover here so we can have a look inside the headstock. Remove the fiberglass cover here. With a bit of persuasion. So it's definitely looking like the oil has got around everywhere, but there's still a lot of sediment in. Well, not as much as there was, but there's still quite a lot of sediment settling in that distribution casting there. But what's good to see is a lot of that sludge seems to be settling at the low points and not where the outlets are, so that's hopeful. Still not quite happy with how it's looking in there. Like, it's still very grimy in some spots, but it's just so hard to get to. And I've seen a good thing to use is a pressure container with some paraffin in, with some kerosene in, diesel, but it's empty. So at the moment I'm just gonna work with the flushing oil and see how we get on. Hi there guys, so today I'm working on my Colchester Triumph TR2000. I've been performing a flush of the oils and cleaning out the sludge that's been built up in this gear, in the headstock's gearbox. After flushing for about 25 minutes or so, running the machine in forwards and reverse at 470 RPM to be able to splash the oil around and get into every nook and cranny possible. I've now took the headstock cover back off and I'm just inspecting the clutch plates and the shaft itself. Now I'm going to try and show you. Obviously the machine is powered off here, and when I engage forwards or reverse, the drive pulley here seems to be moving, has a bit of end float. Hopefully you can see that. So what I'm wondering is, will that need the bearing replaced, a bushing replaced, or is there perhaps a spacer that's worn out, or is that normal? I've got my hands on a manual, but I've only downloaded it digitally. I haven't actually purchased a paper manual for this machine yet, so I can't easily look at the exploded parts diagram, but I will be having a quick look. But I was just wondering if any of you guys could help out or give me some advice. So I've decided that after flushing the headstock and the main feed gearbox, it has helped. It's got a lot of grime that I couldn't have reached, but I do feel like I could remove this selector assembly and oil distribution area. I could remove this and then hopefully gain better access to clean more of the grime out, because I'm still not happy with some of the surfaces inside this gearbox. I'd really like to give it a bit more of a thorough clean before it goes back into service. It's been sitting waiting for it for over a year now, so I think I can give it the proper attention it needs. Those bolts were extremely loose, to be honest, so it's not sure if this has possibly been out in the past by the previous owners or one of the operators throughout its life. Just release a little bit of tension off them detents there. Make sure these 3 screws don't end up in the bottom of the gearbox of the headstock. And then I believe this whole assembly is now loose, hence the flexible pipe feeding the headstock bearings here, and this flexible pipe connecting the feed. Just let that oil drain out of this distribution manifold. I'm going to flip it over in place, but you can see the bottom side of it is still extremely sludged up. Just laying down some blue roll onto the lid to be able to place this assembly. Go. Just gives me a much better view of all the grime that's made its way down to the base, and I can inspect and clean the bearings on all the shafts, which I'm very pleased to have that out. Filler tube just popped in there, not even tight, just loose. So that may not be original. Possibly it is. That's definitely copper. It's probably had a taper fit that's just been loosened if it's been removed a few times. But as you can see inside this gearbox, there's still a considerable build-up of sludge that I just couldn't access. So I'm pleased I've removed that section. Also means I can blast out these feeder tubes and be sure that they are totally clear and not just feeding a load of gunk into the headstock spindle bearings. Even just with a bit of blue roll here, I'm expecting to be able to pick up quite a lot of the sludge off the surface there. Being sure not to force it into the feed points for the headstock bearings, spindle bearings, as I work my way around. Well, that's really starting to clean up quite well. Just being able to get my hand in and give it a good scrubbing makes all the difference, and it means all this gunk isn't going to be recirculating around the machine again. But as it stands, I have had a little play with the gearbox here, and if you position the gears in a certain spot, I can then individually rotate the shafts and check that the bearings are working how they should. So that rear shaft, a little bit of movement in that bearing, but that's supposed to move to change gears. See, when the machine's running and when you stop it, there's a noise that sounds almost like a bearing that's then spinning and dropping as it slows down. So what I'm trying to look for is if there's any cages or any binding bearings that I can feel, any of the cages missing any pieces, or if I can spot anything in the bottom of the machine. But on the whole, at the moment, it's looking quite promising. No serious damage to any of the gears that I can see. I mean, if anything, it could be one of the gears floating in and out of spot, in and out of mesh. So I'm just going to try and give you a bit of a close-up of what it's looking like inside the base of this headstock gearbox. It's quite a considerable build-up of sludge and metal debris, gear particles. As you can see, there's a mesh grate that's fitted over the main sump pipe to try and keep any large particles out of the oil reservoir. I'm not sure if that's a stock item or if it's been added by the previous owners. But as you can see, it's the clutch system there. More than likely going to have to adjust these clutches. So you can see lots of metallic debris in the base of this gearbox, and sadly when you get a proper look, I don't know if you can work that out in the camera there, maybe it's not, there's what looks to be perhaps either a small pin, or I'm convinced there's a couple of them, so they may be little fragments of gear. So there's a chance this machine could have had a replacement gear installed throughout its life, and the remnants of the previous gears are still there. But on the whole, I can't see any major damage to any of the gears. There's definitely some wear. See on the teeth there, there's definitely some wear, but it's to be expected of a machine this age. You can see in the corner there on the selector detent bar, there's still a lot of grime that I'd really like to get out before I refill with fresh oil. Just try and give the machine the best fighting chance without fully rebuilding the whole headstock, because that's a rather pricey process.